When everyone had gone to bed during my stay at my in-laws' house, I was brought into a small, dusty, straight room. "What are we doing here, Susan?" My mother-in-law gave me an evil look. "Don't pretend you don't know. This is where you're sleeping tonight." "Oh, but I'm going to sleep in the guest room with my husband." "There's no bed for a hideous woman." "Hideous?" "Yes, you are. Here, take the newspapers. Sleep on this." Susan took a bundle of old newspapers in a corner of the shed and shoved it to me with a smirk. Why? What did I do to deserve such treatment from her? I felt the back of my nose burning with anger and sadness. I had no choice but to answer in a trembling voice. "Understood." After she left, I tried to get out of there, but it seemed something was propped against the door and it didn't budge. Giving up, I spread a newspaper on the cold, dusty wooden floor and sat down to cry. I couldn't stand it anymore. I would have rather left my husband than be treated like that. Just as I was agonizing, I heard a rattling sound outside, and the door suddenly opened. Standing there was an unexpected person. "My name is Joy. I'm 27 years old. I met my husband Jarvis at work and fell for his affectionate and honest personality. After 2 years of dating, we got engaged. Before visiting his family for the first time, he gave me a heads up. My family has a long lineage in the countryside. My grandma is 80 now and in charge of the house. She's a pretty strict lady. I wonder if she would like me. I'm sure you'll be fine. Besides, my dad and mom are friendly, so don't worry." I was anxious all the way till I get there. His house was located in a vast landscape with acres of green field. It was well maintained and had an affluent appearance. "Oh, we're here," Jarvis called out in the driveway, and his mom came out of the house. I greeted her nervously and handed her a gift. "My goodness, so nice to finally meet you." She was amiable, just as I had heard beforehand. I was ushered into the house with a feeling of some relief. There, I was met by a dignified elderly woman and a gentle-looking man. I knew they were his grandmother and dad. "Oh, welcome. Come, sit down." We sat down in front of the grandmother, as his dad, Dan, suggested. Susan brought glasses of lemonade and joined us. "This is Joy. We're planning to get married this year." When he introduced me to everyone, Dan nodded satisfyingly. "She's wonderful. I'm glad for you, son." In contrast to his cheerful appearance, grandmother just looked at me in silence. Time passed joyfully while I nervously answered questions from his parents. When I sipped the lemonade, I tasted something strange, and involuntarily gasped. To put it simply, it was extremely salty. It tasted like seawater, and I couldn't help but gag. "Are you all right?" Dan looked at me with concern. I just laughed it off and told myself that maybe it was the normal flavor in that area. Didn't want to offend the family by saying something strange. Suddenly, Susan changed the conversation. "If you guys are getting married, we would like to meet your parents as well. When would be a good time?" I only have my mother." Her eyes widened for a moment. One of grandmother's eyebrows seemed to raise as well. My dad passed away in a car accident when I was very young. Since then, my mom raised me by herself. I explained to them what I had told Jarvis in the past. "Well, you two must have gone through a lot." Dan gave me a sympathetic smile. "Then we must make your mother happy. Son, you must take good care of Joy." Jarvis nodded earnestly. His comments filled me with warmth. When it was time for us to leave, I put on the shoes I left at the entrance. A sharp stabbing pain shot up from my toe. I found a small piece of glass stuck in it. Ouch!
Honey, are you okay?
Jarvis was concerned, and Susan also looked at my foot.
Oh my God! How did it get into your shoe? Are you alright?
No worries, I'm fine. I forced a smile and left the house. On the way home, Jarvis started a conversation.
You must have been nervous all day. Poor you. They were all happy with you, though.
I'm not sure. Your grandma didn't say a word to me.
That means it's all good. She's very direct, so if she didn't like something, she would have said it right then and there.
I hope so. I still felt something strange. The odd salty lemonade and piece of glass in my shoe bothered me. It didn't mean that I could say anything doubtful about his family. I kept my discomfort in my heart. After that, my mom met everyone, and Jarvis and I registered our marriage. My mom cried and rejoiced over it, which assured me that I made the right decision. We had a normal married life for a while after that. Jarvis didn't mind that I kept working, so we had a dual income. One day, a package arrived at our new house from Susan. Inside were some vegetables. I immediately called to thank her. After a few rings, she picked up the phone.
Yes, hello?
Hi, Susan. Your package arrived today. Thank you.
Oh, good. It's not for you.
I couldn't believe my ears. She snickered into the phone.
I sent those for Jarvis. If you eat them, I'll be very mad.
She was friendly and kept a smile on her face when she was at the wedding. I was confused by the sarcastic tone compared to that.
I can't believe you actually got married, by the way. You knew you weren't welcome, didn't you?
What do you mean by that?
I put salt in your drink and even hurt you with the glass. You should have known. You're so stupid.
I had a hunch that those were harassment. I was stunned by the shocking revelation, but she continued to press the point.
I don't welcome a girl raised by a single parent like you in my family. Grandma didn't say a word to you, did she? That's because she didn't accept you. No, she didn't want you to say anything in front of Dan and Jarvis. But it was obvious that she was not happy with you. You should remember that.
Tears welled up in my eyes, and I sniffled into the phone. Hearing that, she continued with satisfaction.
If you tell Jarvis about this call, I'll make sure you regret it. I don't think he will believe you anyway. So, please divorce him as soon as possible.
She hung up the phone. All I could do was stand there in shock. When Jarvis came home, I couldn't tell him what happened. He was delighted to see the package and did not doubt his mother's kindness. There was no way I could tell him the truth. I seldom saw my in-laws who lived far away, so I didn't have to deal with Susan face to face. Instead, she called me frequently, made harsh remarks every time. Also, she made sure to call when Jarvis was not around. She was not pleased with my single-parent upbringing, and eventually she started making fun of my mom. A woman raised in a low-class single-parent household isn't good for my son. You were probably living in poverty, weren't you? Your mother is just as bad as you for raising a lowy woman like you. After dealing with her harassment for a while, I was so stressed that I lost weight.
Honey, haven't you lost weight recently?
I rushed to answer Jarvis' question. Oh, really? Maybe it's because I've been on a diet lately. He was worried about me, but I could only brush it off. As the seasons passed, and when summer approached, he asked me,
Hey, why don't we have a short break at my parents' place?
Good idea. I'm looking forward to seeing them again. He was excited to return home after a long while. Not wanting to put a damper on his feelings, I played along with him. In truth, Susan's harassment had not yet ceased. I was fighting a stomach burn that intensified as the trip approached. The day had arrived, and Susan completely hid her usual evil side and welcomed us joyfully. I forced myself to smile and interact with her. When I greeted my grandmother-in-law, Grace, she spoke to me for the first time.
"Welcome back, my dear. Make yourself at home."
"Thank you." Dan, on the other hand, was as friendly as ever. He welcomed us with freshly picked watermelons and cold drinks. If I stayed close to Jarvis, I wasn't going to be bullied by Susan. I stayed within his sight as much as possible. It was effective. Although she sometimes glared at me secretly, she didn't do anything outwardly terrible. I wanted to finish my trip in peace, but I couldn't ignore helping her clean up after dinner. I had no choice but to be alone with her in the kitchen. As soon as we were away from the others, she threatened me in a low voice.
"What on earth do you think you're doing? Sticking to Jarvis all day? I told you to divorce him as soon as possible."
"I have no intention of leaving him," I retorted in a slightly stronger tone. "If possible, I want you to accept me."
"You want me to accept you? You're so brazen for someone who grew up in a low-class single-parent home. You even show your face here again. I'm going to teach you a lesson."
Just as I was about to talk back, her expression tightened, looking behind me. I turned around and saw Grace standing in the corridor.
"Oh, are you going to bed now?" "Yes, I am."
Grace stared instantly at me and Susan for a bit, and then slowly disappeared toward her room. Once she was gone, Susan resumed bullying. I had to endure it until I finished cleaning up. When I was done, I returned to the living room. Jarvis was drunk from drinking with Dan.
"Hon, I'm going to bed. You should get ready too."
Then Susan immediately spoke up.
"She said she wanted to look at the old albums, so I'm thinking of showing her."
Of course, I never said anything like that, and Jarvis had no reason not to believe her.
"Ah, okay. So can I go first?"
"Yes, I'll join you later." As soon as he left, Dan got up, said good night, and walked out of the living room. Once we were alone, Susan ordered me to come to the storage room at the back of the house. It was cluttered with boxes and old furniture, with a naked light bulb on. It was dim, small, and smelled of dust. "What are we doing here?"
"Don't pretend you don't know. This is where you're sleeping tonight."
"Oh, but I'm going to join Jarvis in the guest room." She gave me an evil look.
"There's no bed for a hideous woman."
"Hideous?"
"Yes, you are. Here, take the newspapers. Sleep on this."
She took a bundle of old newspapers from a corner and shoved it at me with a smirk. Why? What did I do to deserve such treatment from her? I felt the back of my nose burning with anger and sadness. I had no choice but to answer in a trembling voice. "Understood. I'll come and let you out in the early morning. Have a good sleep until then." She left in a good mood without hiding her grin. I tried to get out of there, but it seemed something was propped against the door, and it didn't budge. Giving up, I spread a newspaper on the cold, dusty wooden floor and sat down to cry. After what must have been 2 hours, I heard Susan snoring in the distance. I couldn't sleep at all, and sat in the storage room crying. Her bully was becoming more than I could endure. I would have rather left Jarvis than be treated like that. Just as I was agonizing, I heard a rattling sound outside, and the door opened. "Grace!" There she was, staring down at me with her sharp eyes. What in the world are you doing here?
Well, I guess I know.
She wiped my tear-stained face with her wrinkled hands. I was pulled up to my feet and led out into the hallway. Then she suddenly shouted loudly,
Get up, all of you, and go to the living room.
Jarvis was the first to react to her voice. He looked at my miserable face in tears, and then looked at Grace in surprise.
What's going on, Grandma?
Next, Dan came out to his bedroom.
Mom, what's wrong with you at this time of night?
Are you crying, Joy? Finally, Susan came out looking pale. When everyone gathered in the living room, Grace sat at the head of the table and urged me to sit next to her. Jarvis and Dan looked confused.
Dear, tell us honestly what was done to you today.
She spoke in a stern voice.
But don't worry about anything. Just tell us.
Okay. Susan told me that there was no bed for a hideous woman like me. She gave me a bundle of newspapers and locked me in the storage. Jarvis was astonished. She's been harassing me all this time. She called me a low-class single-parent child. She even made fun of my mother, which was really hurtful.
That's outrageous. You, Susan, what are you thinking?
Dan grimaced at her, but she could only tremble her lips. Grace said to Dan,
It's all true. I found her in the storage. I also heard with my own ears Susan saying terrible things to her in the kitchen after dinner.
Dan and Jarvis stared at Susan in shock. Grace glared and yelled at her.
What do you have to say about single mothers? I raised Dan with my own hands alone too. She's a decent girl, you know. How could you do such a terrible thing to her? You are the hideous one.
Then Susan took off the mask of a good wife and wise mother she had been wearing and screamed hysterically.
Shut up! Shut up, all of you! It's your fault. You and Jarvis have been flattering her. She's a stupid bitch who grew up in a single-parent home. Hey!
Dan tried to stop her, but she kept ranting.
Just throw her out of her house right now. I despise her. I am more important to you guys than this woman, right?
Then Grace shouted at her to be quiet, and the room fell silent at once. She turned to Dan.
You see, this is who you have been married to. I've been warning you for a long time, haven't I? Mom. She's all about appearances. But what she actually does is spiteful. I have never seen such a malicious woman. I don't intend to share the house with her anymore. If you don't want to get rid of her, you two need to live together.
Dan turned to Susan with a red face.
You have always been self-centered. But I never thought you could be this cruel. Now that I know your true nature, I can no longer see you as a wife. What are you talking about? I'll give you some money for the time being, but I want you out of here tomorrow.
She couldn't hide her surprise to see him with an unlikely stern attitude. She turned to Jarvis with pleading eyes.
Your father is being horrible to me. Say something to him. Give me a break.
His normally mild voice had a threatening tone to it, which made her jerk.
What did you do to my loving wife? I will never forgive you. I don't want to be in contact with you from now on. Don't ever show your face to me. Oh no!
Her knees gave up, and she fell to the floor. Everyone looked at her with disdain, and no one consoled her. Instead, Dan and Jarvis apologized to me repeatedly. I also apologized to them for not telling them about her sooner. And so the night turned into dusk. and Grace and Dan saw us off in the morning.
Right before we left, Grace said to me, "This is your home too. When you come back next time, she'll be gone, so don't worry."
I nodded and gave her a tight hug, then got into the car. I was told that Dan later divorced Susan. He had been fed up with her self-serving and inconsiderate way. They were able to divorce with only the minimum division of property. After being kicked out, Susan was also turned away by her parents, and she was forced to live alone in a smart apartment. She's been a housewife for a long time, but now she has a part-time job. She must be struggling to adjust to the new life. She will probably spend lonely golden years alone, but it's all her fault. I, on the other hand, have been relieved from my stress, and to my surprise, I am pregnant. Since the instant, Jarvis has become even more affectionate to me. Dan and Grace have been very caring as well, so I've been able to enjoy a relaxed pregnancy. I will go back and show Grace her great-grandchild once the baby is born. Right now, I am genuinely looking forward to going there.